the day my daughter-in-law sent me a candle with a thank you note dissolving our partnership, I found the original 50-50 agreement wax sealed inside my late husband's favorite pillar mold. That single sheet of paper would void a $520,000 sale, send her to prison for perjury, and embed her case number on the bottom of every candle I pour now, staring up at you from the glass as the last thing you see before you light the wick. My name is Marie Ellison. For 32 years I processed accounts payable for a commercial bakery called Ryman & Sons, a brick building on the industrial edge of town that smelled of yeast and brown sugar even in the parking lot. I sat in a back office with a rubber stamp that said approved in heavy red ink and a desktop calculator whose keys groaned when you pressed them. I reconciled 800 invoice lines a week, spotted duplicate billings the junior bookkeepers missed, and learned that a person's signature is a kind of handwriting fingerprint. The slant of the capital letter, the loop of a G, the way the ink lifts at the end of a stroke, those things become as familiar as a friend's voice. I can spot a forged signature from across a room the way a mechanic hears a misfire before the check engine light comes on, and that skill became the skeleton key to everything that followed. Harold, my husband, was a quiet man who designed climate control systems for rare book libraries and museum archives. He understood the precise humidity percentage that keeps a 15th century manuscript from crumbling, and the exact dew point at which cellulose begins to mildew. At home, he loved sandalwood candles because the scent reminded him of the old wooden shelving in the university stacks where we first met. We blended wax in the basement on winter weekends for 20 years, single-batch pours in aluminum molds he'd mail-ordered from a foundry in Wisconsin. Midnight embers, balsam fireside, a spiced orange we called Solstice Kitchen. We never sold a single jar. We gave them away at Christmas and at weddings and to the nurses during Harold's first round of chemo. That was pancreatic cancer, discovered late, the kind of diagnosis that a technician writing an install manual for a new storage vault cannot ever prepare for. When the disease took him, I sat in the kitchen for 3 days with the shades drawn. On the 4th day, the $85,000 life insurance check arrived by certified mail, and I did not cry. I walked to the small business development center downtown, opened a sole proprietorship under the name Harold's Light, and then I called Leela. Leela was my daughter-in-law, the widow of my son Daniel, who had died in a car accident 4 years before Harold's diagnosis. She stayed in our lives afterward, a young woman with a degree in marketing from a state university, and a smile that always felt prepared in advance. I offered her 50% of a new hand-poured candle company if she would handle branding, website and sales, while I handled production and the financial books. She said yes immediately, her voice bright as a chime. The following Tuesday morning we walked into Valley Savings Bank, sat down with a notary named Evelyn Garber, and executed a partnership agreement on a thick sheaf of cream-colored paper. The document defined a genuine 50-50 split of revenue, liabilities, and intellectual property, and at the very bottom I added a playful clause in memory of Daniel, who once joked that his mother-in-law should owe him a lifetime supply of candles as a bride price. The clause read, "Each partner shall be entitled to a lifetime candle subscription, free of charge, no substitutions." Evelyn chuckled, said she'd never notarized a candle subscription before, and stamped the page with her official seal. I took the original home and placed it in a small fireproof safe in the basement, the same safe where Harold had stored the deed to the house and his mother's wedding ring. I set it right next to a milk crate of his old aluminum pillar molds. 3 years passed. The company grew from a folding table at a local farmer's market to a small production studio in a rented industrial suite, 200 square feet with a double boiler, a pouring station, and a shipping table. We called the brand Ember and Oak, and sold through a website that Leela managed and an Instagram account that gathered 20,000 followers. Then, on a Thursday in late April, an acquisition manager from a national home decor chain called Restful Spaces sent a letter of intent. The chain wanted to purchase our full scent formula library, trademark, and remaining inventory of jars and lids. The offered price was $520,000. Leela arrived at my house that afternoon with a bottle of Prosecco so cold the glass was sweating, and a man she introduced as her husband. His name was Trent Hascombe, a real estate investor with a crisp polo shirt and a watch that ticked with quiet desperation, the kind of man whose financial statements never add up but who can always find someone willing to believe the next deal will reverse everything. They poured me a glass I did not drink, and within 72 hours, every assumption I had ever held about family loyalty dissolved into smoke. The discovery began on a Saturday morning, 3 days after the offer letter. Leela had spent the previous afternoon helping me clear out the basement so I could convert it into what she called a celebration open house. She hauled a milk crate of Harold's old candle, making supplies toward the trash bins in the driveway, her manicured hands gripping the plastic handle as if the crate itself were contaminated. I could see her through the kitchen window, a morning glare on the glass, and I heard her say to Trent, "It's all greasy junk, smells like old paraffin and a dead man's hobby." Trent stood behind her, texting, his jaw tight. They stacked the crate on top of a bag of grass clippings and drove off to meet a real estate agent. I waited until their car turned the corner, then walked out to the bins in my slippers and pulled the crate back into the house. Harold had been a methodical man. He labeled everything with a Dymo embossing tape: 2-inch votive, 3-inch pillar, 4-inch container, seamless aluminum pillar mold no. 7. The crate held 24 molds, each one wrapped in old newspaper that smelled of ink and time. One mold, the seamless 2-piece pillar mold we had used for our Midnight Embers run, felt heavier than I remembered, and when I unscrewed the aluminum base something rattled inside, a dry whisper against metal. I tipped the mold over the kitchen table, and a cylinder wrapped in wax paper slid out, sealed at the ends with drips of soy wax that had yellowed to the color of old ivory. I peeled the wax away with my thumbnail, feeling the tackiness give way, and there, rolled tight, was a sheaf of cream-colored paper. My original 50-50 partnership agreement from Valley Savings Bank, notarization stamp fully legible, Evelyn Garber's looping signature still crisp in blue ink. My fingers shook as I flattened the document, then I turned it over and my breath stopped. On the back, filling the lower third of the page, was Harold's handwriting, the tight, precise architect's script he used on blueprint annotations and humidity calibration schedules. He must have written it on a day when I was at the bakery, sitting at the same table where I now stood. "Marie," the note read, "this mold has kept our best scents safe. It will keep this agreement safe too. I've watched Leela and I don't trust her relationship with truth. She came by 3 times while you were at work last month, asking about my policy, offering to organize our estate folder. I saw her open the filing cabinet when she thought I was napping. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to worry you, but I'm writing this now in case I'm not around to check the locks myself. If she ever asks you to sign something new after I'm gone, check every signature against this one. She will try to unmake what you built. Do not trust her, save yourself." He had dated it 6 months before he died. I sat down slowly, the kitchen chair creaking under me. Harold had constructed a dead man's switch out of a wax mold, a forensic time capsule sealed with the same substance that held the scent memories of our life together. He had seen the predator before I had, and he had built me a weapon. I slid the agreement into a new Ziploc bag, carried it to the basement, and hid it behind the air handler, under a loose floorboard he had shown me during a burst pipe repair a decade earlier. Then I went upstairs, washed my face, and waited for my daughter-in-law to reveal her plan in full. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the people who claim to help you the most are sometimes the ones who have already drafted the paperwork to take everything you have. Leela's manipulation began that same afternoon. She called from her car, voice honeyed with concern. "Marie, honey, Restful Spaces needs the sale finalized within 30 days. Our tax advisor, a really sharp guy, says dissolving the partnership before the transaction will save us almost $40,000 in self-employment taxes. I've got a simple dissolution agreement drawn up, just a formality, 2 pages. Come over for dinner tonight and we'll sign it together." I said I'd think about it, and I heard the faintest flick of irritation in her silence before she recovered and said, "Of course, take your time." She did not want me to take my time. She wanted me to act before I could think. Over the next 2 weeks, she and Trent intensified their campaign. They arrived at my house with a stack of documents, brightly colored adhesive tabs marking the signature lines. The first document was titled Mutual Dissolution and General Release, and it stated in dense legalese that I voluntarily relinquished all my ownership shares, intellectual property rights, and future royalty claims in exchange for good and valuable consideration already received. The consideration was not identified anywhere in the document. The second was a limited power of attorney granting Leela authority to execute any final sale agreements on my behalf. I picked up a pen, then paused, squinting, and said, "This print is so small I'll need my magnifying glass. Maybe tomorrow." The next morning, Trent brought a notary public, a young man in a cheap blazer, to witness my signature. I smiled and said I hadn't yet heard back from my bookkeeper. "Bookkeeper?" Trent asked, his eyes flicking to Leela. "Marie, you don't have a bookkeeper." I nodded slowly the way a confused older woman might. Oh, I'm sure I do, I'll call her. What's today, Wednesday? She works Mondays and Thursdays, I'll call her Thursday. They left without signatures. The notary looked embarrassed. When the pressure proved insufficient, Leela switched tactics. She called me late one evening, her voice damp with practiced worry. Marie, I've been thinking, you're alone in that big house with all those stairs and the sale is going to be so stressful. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? Trent and I have a guest suite with its own bathroom. I can cook for you, take you to your appointments. Please, let us take care of you. The big house was a 1940s Cape Cod with 6 stairs to the front porch. I had walked those stairs 4 times a day for 40 years without incident. I said yes anyway because I needed to be inside their home, close to their conversations, their mail, their unlocked office door. I packed a small suitcase and let them move me into the guest suite at the far end of their split level. I wore cardigans every day, spoke in a quiet voice, and asked them to repeat entire sentences 3 times. I nodded vacantly whenever Trent mentioned estate simplification or joint escrow instructions, and I never once hinted that I had already deciphered every word of their scheme. Undercover investigation took root inside that house like a wick burning through paraffin, slow and nearly invisible, until the evidence pooled around me. I began by cataloguing Trent's financial panic. His cell phone rang at odd hours, 6 in the morning, 11 at night, and he would step into the garage, his voice rising with words I recognized from my years in accounts payable. Balloon payment, LTV ratio, hard money lender, 48-hour default clause. I wrote them down on a small notepad hidden inside my suitcase, adding dates and times. One afternoon he paced the driveway for 20 minutes, his voice cracking as he said, I told you, the bridge closes in 2 weeks, the candle deal is absolutely solid, you'll have your 60 back with 10 points. I knew a bridge loan when I heard one, a short-term high-interest loan secured against anticipated business proceeds. Trent had already spent the sale proceeds in his mind, and he was drowning. Leela took her calls in the sunroom, a glassed-in addition at the back of the house where she assumed the closed door gave her privacy. She underestimated the old metal heat vents that connected the sunroom to the hallway near the guest suite. I discovered on my second day that if I pressed my ear to the register in my room, I could hear every syllable. She was speaking to a woman named Cassie, the acquisition manager at Restful Spaces, and what I heard remapped the entire financial geography of the deal. No, she's not going to be a problem, Leela said. She's an old lady who lights candles and thinks a balance sheet is a piece of laundry. I'll have the full inventory count and formula documentation to your transfer agent by the 15th. Yes, the full 620 wire transfer instruction sheet is attached. Seriously, Cassie, the brand is mine. 620, not 520. The real purchase offer was $620,000. I wrote that number down and circled it 3 times, my pen nearly tearing the paper. A second conversation 2 days later was even more explicit. Leela's voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. Obviously the purchase price stays between us. I told the old woman 520. She's never run a real business, she doesn't know how to look up a commercial listing. The extra 100 goes straight to Trent's note and our Visa bill, and she gets a thank you candle and a nice little card. By the time she figures it out, the dissolution will already be notarized and filed. A thank you candle. I was to be compensated for my 32 years of financial precision and my dead husband's wax formula legacy with a candle. The accident that earned me access to their private spaces arrived on a Friday morning. The guest bathroom sink had been draining slowly for several days, and Trent complained he couldn't shave without standing ankle-deep in grey water. Leela called a plumber, but I volunteered to take a look first, describing it as a little old lady hobby I'd picked up from Harold. They laughed. I pulled on a pair of rubber gloves, retrieved a small canvas toolkit from the bottom of my suitcase where I had hidden a 6-inch basin wrench, a pair of channel lock pliers, and a roll of Teflon tape, and I began dismantling the P-trap under the sink. The chrome slip nut was stuck, calcified by years of Leela's hair products, so I wrapped the jaws of the wrench with a thin rag to avoid scratching the finish and applied steady counterclockwise pressure until the nut cracked free. Water spilled into the bucket I had positioned underneath, and a foul rope of tangled blonde hair and soap scum slid out of the pipe. Leela stood in the doorway, her mouth slightly open, as I extracted the entire clog in one long, glistening pull, and then reassembled the plumbing in 12 minutes flat, wiping each connection with a microfiber cloth and testing for leaks by running the water for 2 minutes. I spent 30 years fixing dough mixers and proofing cabinets, honey, I said, drying my hands on a paper towel. A P-trap is in my sleep. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, then shook it off and said, well, that's a useful skill for a grandma. She never quite connected the skill to the filing cabinet, and that was her terminal mistake. The cabinet was a 2-drawer Century model beige, with a simple wafer lock that any office supply store sells for under $100. I recognized it instantly because Ryman & Sons Bakery had used an identical cabinet for employee time cards, and I had once had to open one after a shift manager quit and took the key. The locksmith who came that day showed me, off the record, how you could rake a wafer lock with a stiff piece of metal and a tension wrench. He said the lock had only 4 wafers, and they were arranged in a simple pattern that didn't have any security pins, just flat little wafers that you could set one at a time if you were patient. I had been patient for 3 years of Leela's smiling betrayal. I waited until a Tuesday afternoon when Leela and Trent were both meeting with their real estate attorney. I took a bobby pin from my hair and a second, thicker pin that I found in the guest bathroom drawer, and I knelt in front of the filing cabinet in their home office. I bent the first pin into a tension wrench, a 90-degree angle at the very tip. I slid that into the lower edge of the keyway and applied a light, steady clockwise pressure, the exact amount of torque you might use to press a doorbell. Then I straightened the second bobby pin and inserted it into the lock above the tension wrench, pushing it all the way to the back. I worked the pin in and out, feeling for the wafers. The first wafer set with a soft metallic click. I counted to 30, adjusted the angle, and felt the second. At minute 38, the third wafer caught, a tiny resistance, then release. At exactly 42 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, I heard the fourth wafer click into place, and the plug rotated with a smooth, satisfying turn. The drawer slid open, and inside I found a forest of paper that would hang my daughter-in-law. The top folder was labeled Restful Sale Final. I opened it to find the original letter of intent from the chain, and the purchase price was $620,000, clearly typed, with a breakdown of $80,000 for inventory and $540,000 for intellectual property. Beside it was a signed release of interest that bore my name across the bottom, but the signature was a clumsy forgery. The M in Marie slanted left instead of right. The R lacked its characteristic hook. The final E trailed off in a flourish that belonged to Leela's own handwriting, not mine. Beneath that was a promissory note from Trent to a private lender called Harborview Lending, $60,000, secured by anticipated proceeds of Ember and Oak candle brand sale, with a 30-day maturity date that fell 3 days before the scheduled closing. A foreclosure notice on their home was clipped to the note, accelerated by a second mortgage they had taken out 18 months earlier to fund a house flipping project that had cratered, and the most chilling document, tucked into a manila sleeve, was a sworn affidavit drafted by a local probate attorney named Blake Morrison, stating that I, Marie Ellison, was suffering from diminished cognitive capacity, required a legal conservator for my financial affairs, and that Leela Morneau, as my only surviving family member through marriage, was petitioning for immediate appointment. The petition was dated for the following week, and based on the timeline, they intended to file it the day after I signed the dissolution, rendering any later challenge from a confused old woman legally impossible. Shredded papers in the recycling bin beside the desk told me the rest. I spent an hour piecing together strips of white paper like a jigsaw puzzle. Bank statements for the Ember and Oak business account showed monthly transfers of $4,300 to Leela's personal credit card, memo line consulting fees, for services she had never performed. Inventory purchase records showed $1,800 worth of wax and fragrance oils that had been ordered on the company account, but shipped to a competitor's production address. The revenue split had been fraudulent for at least a year. I photographed every page, every signature, every account number. I wiped the cabinet surfaces, the bobby pins, and the door handle with a microfiber cloth, then retreated to my guest suite. That night, I logged every fact into a timeline on my notepad, using the same bullet point format I had used at Ryman & Sons to catch invoice fraud. I now had evidence of forgery, wire fraud, elder exploitation, and a planned conservatorship heist. But I needed an ally with the legal authority to freeze everything before the sale closed. The ally materialized through the woman whose stamp held the entire thing together. I called Valley Savings Bank the next morning and asked to speak with Evelyn Garber, the notary. She remembered me immediately, not just because of the quirky candle subscription clause, but because Harold had made a habit of delivering a small sandalwood votive to her desk every Christmas, a little gesture he called banker's light. Her voice trembled when I mentioned him, and when I said I needed to review the notarization log for a legal matter, she pulled the book without a single question. The log showed my entry, Leela's entry, both of our driver's license numbers, and the sequential seal number. I asked her a hypothetical. If someone presented a dissolution document claiming to have been notarized by her, could she confirm its validity if the seal serial was different? She paused, and in that pause I heard her training click into place. "Marie," she said, "if the serial doesn't match the log, the document is fraudulent. And if someone uses my name on a fraudulent document, that's a federal offense. Let me connect you with our compliance officer, Sarah Behrens." Sarah Behrens was a former bank examiner who had spent a decade investigating financial crimes. I met her in a small conference room at the bank, the walls lined with privacy policy posters, and I laid out my photographs, the original agreement with Harold's note, and a USB drive containing the audio recordings I had made of Leela's phone conversations, captured on a small digital recorder I had purchased at an electronics store, and hidden inside a hollowed-out book in the guest bedroom. My state permits one-party consent recording, and the conversations I captured included Leela explicitly stating that she intended to defraud me of $100,000 and file a conservatorship under false pretenses. Sarah paged through the evidence for 10 silent minutes, then closed the folder and said, "I'm going to refer this to a postal inspector I know. The mail fraud statute covers any document sent through the mail, and the letter of intent came via certified mail. That's federal jurisdiction." 2 days later, I was sitting in a booth at a diner near the interstate with Inspector Margaret Chen, a compact woman with sharp eyes who carried a black satchel. She listened to my story, examined the original agreement, and confirmed that the forged dissolution would constitute mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and perjury, all with sentencing guidelines that stretched into years, not months, because of the dollar amounts and the vulnerable adult enhancement. Then she asked me to help gather the final piece of digital proof. She handed me a device, a USB keylogger no bigger than a thumbnail, a small dongle that would intercept every keystroke typed on Leela's computer. I was to insert it between the keyboard cable and the tower in the home office. She explained that the metadata would capture the exact time. Leela opened the scanned PDF of my original signature, tried to modify it, and attempted to print a new document with my forged approval that would establish intent beyond any reasonable doubt. I installed the keylogger the next morning at 7:40, while Leela was in the shower and Trent had already left for a meeting. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the water in the pipes would carry the sound. I unscrewed the keyboard cable from the back of the computer tower, plugged in the dongle, and then reattached the keyboard. The whole process took 8 seconds. I walked back to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. My hands were perfectly steady because this was nothing. I had once balanced an entire fiscal year's ledgers during a power outage using a crank flashlight. Inserting a piece of hardware was a Tuesday. The maximum cruelty beat arrived before the data extraction, because I needed to know if there was any sliver of humanity left in that house before Inspector Chen moved in. I wanted to see them choose the sale over my life, and I wanted them to do it in a way that would leave no doubt in my own heart. I planned the collapse for a Tuesday morning, when I knew Trent was at a lender's office begging for an extension, and the final contract from Restful Spaces was scheduled to arrive by courier. I stood at the kitchen island at 10 minutes past 9, wearing a thin cardigan and holding a ceramic mug of tea. Leela sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone, the front door visible through the sunroom windows. I let a small moan escape my throat, then clutched my chest with my left hand, the mug slipping from my right and shattering on the tile floor. I stumbled sideways into the refrigerator, my breathing becoming shallow and rapid, my knees buckling. I had watched Harold do exactly this on our last morning together, and the memory gave me an authenticity that no actor could replicate. Leela looked up. Her eyes tracked from my face to the front door where the courier's blue truck had just braked at the curb. She stood up and walked toward the door, not toward me. Trent walked in from the garage at that same moment, saw me slumped on the floor and froze. Leela said, "The courier is here. Get the packet inside, I'll handle her in a minute." She stepped over my extended legs, careful not to brush my shoe with her own, and opened the door. I heard her thank the driver, take the envelope and rip it open right there in the sunroom. Then she said, "Finally. The signature pages are all here. Trent, we close Friday." 47 seconds passed before she even glanced toward the kitchen. Then she said, without a shred of urgency, "Call 911 or whatever, just don't let them come into this room. I don't want paramedics tracking mud on the rug before closing day." I let them call. The paramedics arrived, lifted me onto a gurney, and I moaned that I couldn't feel my fingers. At the emergency room, they ran an EKG and blood work and found nothing physically wrong, so the attending physician diagnosed a panic attack. I was discharged 2 hours later and I took a taxi back to the house. Leela had not called a single time. The signed contract packet sat on the kitchen table, a fresh coffee ring already staining the corner. I photographed the wedded signature line, the date, and the delivery tracking number, forwarded everything to Inspector Chen, and then I sat in the guest bedroom for the rest of the afternoon. Whatever thread had tied me to the idea of my daughter-in-law, as family had been snipped so cleanly, I could not find the ends. The confrontation arrived 5 days later, on the following Monday morning, at a title company called Landmark Closings in a glass-walled office park near the chain's regional headquarters. Leela had arranged the meeting as a final sign-off to release the sale funds into a joint escrow account, and she had dressed me that morning in a soft blue cardigan and comfortable flats, as if I were a doll. I let her. I packed my handbag myself, with the original 50-50 agreement inside a plastic sleeve, the bank notarization log copy, and a small digital recorder I had turned on before entering. The title agent was a nervous young man named Greg with a double-breasted suit and a stack of documents 3 inches high. Leela slid the forged dissolution across the polished table toward me, her signature already inked on the partner line, a blank space marked Marie Ellison with a little sticky arrow. "Just sign here, Mom," she said, using the word Mom for the first time since Danny's funeral. "This makes everything simple and you can finally relax." Trent leaned back in his chair, refreshing his phone every 10 seconds, probably checking his lender's wire status. I pulled the original agreement from my bag, the wax paper crinkling loud as a gunshot in the silent room, and I set it on top of the dissolution. "No," I said. "I've already signed the one that matters." Leela's face went white, then a deep, blotchy red. "Where did you get that?" She lunged across the table, her fingers closing on the edge of the paper, but I had it pinned under my palm. Greg, the title agent, looked from me to her, confusion cascading across his features. Then the door of the conference room opened, and Inspector Margaret Chen walked in with 2 uniformed postal inspectors and Sarah Behrens from the bank. Margaret placed a hand over the forged dissolution sheet and said, her voice calm, "Leela Morneau and Trent Hascombe, you are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, perjury, and attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Ms. Ellison holds sole ownership of the Ember and Oak brand and all its assets. This sale is void." Leela screamed, words that blurred into threats and profanity. Trent just sat there, his phone sliding from his fingers onto the carpet, his face the color of old candle wax. The inspectors handcuffed them both, and Greg, the title agent, called his legal department to freeze the pending wire transfer immediately. Cassie from Restful Spaces phoned me 2 hours later, her voice shaken, to apologize and express the chain's continued interest in a legitimate, properly licensed partnership. I told her I would consider it after the dust settled. Then I drove back to my 6-stairs house, let myself in with my own key, and poured a midnight embers candle from Harold's pillar mold for the first time in 3 years. The aftermath unrolled with the slow, methodical certainty of a wax pool reaching the edge of the vessel. Leela was charged in federal court with 3 counts of felony perjury, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, 1 count of mail fraud, and 1 count of elder exploitation. She pled guilty, and the judge sentenced her to 3 years in a state correctional facility, plus 5 years of supervised probation and full restitution of all embezzled funds, a total of $112,000 including penalties and statutory interest. Trent's plea deal on the real estate fraud and the forged promissory note gave him 18 months of probation, a $45,000 fine, and a lifetime bar from any fiduciary role. Their house fell into foreclosure, their vehicle was repossessed, and their joint bank accounts were seized to satisfy the restitution order. I reclaimed my company, renamed it Wick of Deceit Candles, and licensed the scent formulas to Restful Spaces under a deal that paid $415,000 upfront, plus a 7% royalty on all products sold through their stores, with me retaining 100% ownership of the manufacturing entity and the brand. The first scent line I released included Perjury Plum, Trustful Tangerine, Double-Crossed Clove, and Midnight Embers, the original formula that Harold and I poured on the winter we got married. The restitution work release program, a condition of Leela's probation after her custodial sentence, assigned her to my production facility for 6 months. She wicks jars on the line from 8 to 4 daily, wearing an apron I designed myself, black block letters on white canvas that read, "Snuffed Out Trust." Every candle bottom now bears a heat-stamped imprint with her federal case number, 324CR00117, and the phrase, "Light carefully, some intentions burn darker than others." The first day she saw the stamp, she froze, and I saw the realization pass through her eyes. This was permanent, a legacy she would never outrun. I still pour the first 100 units of every new scent in Harold's pillow mold. His note is framed on my desk, next to a photo of him holding a Dymo label gun, his grin half hidden by the shadow of his reading glasses. That man who designed perfect humidity for rare manuscripts and knew the dew point of a century-old page, also designed a perfect exit for a woman who trusted the wrong relative. His foresight and a bit of heart wax saved everything. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If you believe that the only signatures that last are the ones you verify yourself, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones finish the burn.